Welcome, everyone, to DEI After 5, the show that focuses on topics across diversity, equity, and inclusion with some of the brightest minds in the industry. Here's your hostess, inclusive culture curator and coach, Sacha Thompson.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of DEI After 5. All right, so we have been doing these conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, justice, all of the letters, all of it. And the more and more I talk to leaders and organizations about this work and what they're trying to do and trying to accomplish, I'm realizing that so many of them are still somewhat in that checkbox mentality of, this is what we as an organization need to do. And if we just do this, everyone's going to feel like they're included. But that's not necessarily the case, right? It is absolutely up to the employer, but the employees. This is something that is mutually beneficial for both. And so today I'm going to have a conversation with Dimple Shah, who is an enterprise agile coach and consultant, about the role, or actually the two-way street of inclusion and what that looks like, or what it should look like in the workplace. So Dimple, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much, Sasha. I'm just so excited to be here.
Wonderful. So for anyone that may not know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this work?
Okay, well, let me start with what I always say. I am amongst the few lucky ones who get to call two countries my home. So I'm originally from India, and I've been in this wonderful country for over 18 years now, and have been in IT essentially for a couple of decades now, and have various roles. That's my professional life, and now I work as an enterprise agile coach. Who am I really? I like to say that I am a purpose-driven human who is always wanting to find ways to give it forward to the society, to the people who made me feel welcomed, share a little bit about my experiences, hoping it'll spread more awareness. Other thing that you need to know about me is I'm very passionate about diversity and agility. And I guess that's how we got connected over one of my passions.
Yep, absolutely. And so it's interesting. Yeah, I want you to dive into that a little bit because, when most people hear like enterprise agile, right, they're thinking systems, structures, they're, all of those things. And then diversity, inclusion, there's some folks that believe like that's just touchy-feely, like they're total opposites, right? So how do you bring those two things together in your work?
Wonderful, wonderful way to start our conversations, actually, because since the past few years, I've been trying to navigate through or learn and spread the idea of how agility and diversity can go together. So when I landed into the world of this agile coaching, it was merely by accident. And I was very lucky to be trained by some of the brilliant agile coaches around me. And when I started diving a little bit more into agility as opposed to agile, I realized to create a strong foundation of agility that could bring in transformations in organizations, it really, the foundation also comes through diversity. And how, you might ask, it's diversity of ideas, diversity of people, diversity of cultures. I have also been fortunate to work through distributed teams, like literally all over the world, like people who don't even speak our language. I have been very fortunate to work alongside them, and I've got to learn on how I can, as an agile coach, serve someone who do not even understand English. Mm-hmm. And then when I started deep diving into some of these concepts, some of the foundational concepts, as I call it, psychological safety, and how can you bring these sustainable changes, I realized more and more, it's like, well, these two ideas, even though very different, they're so complementary of each other. And it you mentioned during the introduction of this show that unfortunately it has remained a checkbox. How can we go past that checkbox with these two notions and we can actually start talking about the intrinsic idea behind these two concepts that can not only embrace every kind of people, every kind of ideas that they may have, but also they can lead to happy customers who doesn't
Yeah.
want it, right?
And it's so funny that you put it that way, because when I think of organizations that are psychologically safe, right? Like they're the epitome, that's where the innovation happens, right? That's where the diversity of experiences and thoughts and ideas and all of that come together
Mhm.
to create something new and wonderful and beautiful for customers that has not been brought up before, right? Has not been
Mhm.
created before. And so what you're really talking about is creating an environment where everyone thrives, everyone
Mhm.
sees themselves in the work, everyone sees people that may not be at the table as a part of
Mhm.
the work, right? Like
Mhm.
they're thinking bigger picture. Um,
Mhm.
and in doing so, creating like the ultimate products, the ultimate services, just, all of these things. And that's
Mhm.
ultimately what this work is about, right? Like, how do we find voice and create voice for people so that they are reflected in the work that's being
Mhm.
done, and systems are created to expand and grow so that it's more inclusive, right? Like, so
Mhm.
it's all tied together. So in just talking to you, I'm like, I see how it's all like it's all interconnected. I absolutely love that. I talked about inclusion being a two-way street. And, I'm thinking now of what we just discussed and how agile and agility and diversity kind of come together. Diversity is, when you think of the definition of diversity, it really is just having, unique experiences,
Mhm.
all the experiences we have as individuals, right? That encompass, religion,
Mhm.
ability, all of these things.
Mhm.
When I think of inclusion, it's, does everyone feel that they have a space at the table, right? Or at least their voice is being heard,
Mhm.
and they feel valued and connected in that way. But, when I was prepping for this, we talked about inclusion being a two-way street, right? So on one hand, organizations are doing a lot of work and trying to make sure that people feel included and connected and, again, checking these boxes. Like, we're doing all of these things. What is missing, or what needs to take place so that employees or the people, right, are part of that process?
Yeah. What I think is missing is action. So we're doing all sorts of courses. We're bringing in trainers. We're bringing in speakers to talk about diversity, excuse me, and how to be inclusive. Often, what happens is when we go back to our professional lives, we don't see as many opportunities intentionally to implement everything that we've
Mm,
heard.
mhm,
Like, for instance, when I say why diversity is so important in order to bring in agility, my experience growing up in an environment in India, I might have a completely different perspective from you or from
mhm,
someone else who's grown up differently in a country. So my way of approaching that problem essentially also is going to be different. So what I always say is treat everyone as humans and you're just going to be fine. But oftentimes what happens is we are just so driven. I'm resisting using the word stuck because I strongly believe that people have right intentions in mind. But we are so driven by this notion to getting things done.
mhm,
Oftentimes, all those things that are not seen and visible, they often go unnoticed, just like privilege, right? I'm The other day I was listening to a TED talk where it was shared that while diversity is essentially, well, excuse me, privilege is essentially invisible to people who have it. So
yeah,
it was such a brilliant share at that time. I took a note of it and I'm like, okay, well, let's say if I'm an enterprise agile coach entering a system, I have the privilege that whatever I say is going to be taken as, well, she's the expert, she knows what she's saying, let's just go with
Mm-hmm.
it. But I can very well be wrong, and I might not notice. And if I give enough space to everyone I'm working with that, hey, tell me if I'm wrong, then I'm just walking my dog. I am just trying to
Yeah.
implement everything that I have learned or listened to. I'm doing it in action. But
Yeah.
oftentimes, what happens is when we are so driven by serving customers, which is, of course, important, by numbers and everything, we have to be mindful and intentional to realizing, is there something that might be our blind spots that we are missing while we are just so driven by results, which, again, it's not a bad thing at all. But that is why you have some of these experts, DEI officers or coaches or everyone who can help you with those blind spots. Maybe we can hold a mirror, and
Yeah.
that's why I say also that inclusion is a two-way street, because I just talked about my privilege coming in with a title. Now let's just kind of say that I do not have that privilege, where I am a brown woman and I'm maybe the only person who looks like me in the room. And now it is my responsibility also. So oftentimes what I entered US was like, oh, okay, well, I don't know anything, I'm going to wait for everyone to make space for me. But people don't know what they don't know, so unless I tell them what I need, oftentimes they will not understand that this is what I need. And once I've realized that, since the past few years, once I've raised my hand and said, well, yeah, this is what it is, there have been so many people whom I might call in this world to be privileged. They just step up. I mean, I have
Yeah.
so many wonderful friends without whose support I would not have learned the ways of systems in the US, right? So that's why I always remind everyone it's a two-way street.
I appreciate those analogies that you gave, because um we don't often, if you have privilege, you often don't think about it, right? Because it's a
Mhm,
privilege. You don't have to, it's what you don't have to navigate, right? I
mhm,
used to facilitate
mhm,
for an organization, and that was how they described privilege. It's the things that you don't have to navigate
mhm,
or think about. And I use the example of, currently I am able-bodied, right? I don't have to think about, if I'm going into a building, if it has an elevator or
mhm,
escalator or like, I don't have to think about that. I just go in and have to, just go where I'm going. Whereas
mhm,
somebody that may have, even if it's a temporary disability, right? Like they broke their leg and so they're with crutches right now, or whatever it is, those are the things that they have to navigate. And so what's interesting to me is, now that I know and I understand that, how do I lend that privilege, right? How do I make sure that this situation is inclusive,
mhm,
by thinking about, okay, what is something that someone has to navigate that I don't necessarily have to navigate, right? And so for
mhm,
me, when you talk about that two-way street, it's also somebody else within the organization
mhm.
speaking up and thinking about the things that other people have to navigate that they may not necessarily have to navigate themselves,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so when we were talking and prepping for this, and I heard you talk about this two-way street, that's what came up for me. It's, how do I create an environment where I can lend my privilege, right? One, if I'm at the table, that's a privilege. Two, how can I bring voice to those that aren't at the table,
Mhm.
right? So they're not always having to advocate for themselves,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
that becomes tiring. That absolutely becomes
Yeah.
tiring.
Yeah.
Um,
And then there's a third set of people where they don't even have the courage, maybe, to speak up.
right.
Like I was not big on spreading awareness, to be honest with you, when I didn't have my visa,
Mm,
because I was so scared. I'm an immigrant in this
mhm,
country. My intention is right, but what if it doesn't land right? So
mhm,
now I feel that I feel some kind of a responsibility that now I am safe. I have a green card. Now I need to stand up for all those dimples who was
mm,
not able to speak up at that time for some or the other reason, and help them.
yeah. I want to take that even a step further,
All right.
because for me, so I came to this country when I was nearly two,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this lack of Caribbean accent is because I was raised in Virginia. So I had that privilege, right? I had American accent privilege. And so no one ever questioned if I was an American because I sounded like. And so therefore my courage came from the fact that no one's going to question me, right? Unless they come home with me and hear my parents speak. Right. So at school, I could be the one that was, I don't agree with that. I don't, I could stir the pot because I didn't have that over my head. That being said, 2016, right? Big election year taking place. I realized, I was like, wait a minute, this privilege may be questioned, may come into question. Even though I have a green card, that may not be enough. And so I was like, okay, now I have to go, get my American citizenship. That gives me a little bit more privilege because now I can vote. Now I can, do all of these things. Yeah. So, it's kind of taking your story, and we don't necessarily realize like some of these privileges that we have and the ability to speak up. And some of us take it for granted that we can speak up and others can't. Yeah. And so when others can't, right, that's a level of exclusion that you may or may not necessarily know that they're holding, or they may not be speaking up because of these fears, right, that are taking place. I know so many, and I was doing a workshop not too long ago where they said, 44% of the LGBTQ plus community isn't out at work. Right? Fear.
Yeah.
Right. They see what's going on in the world around them, especially, at the state level. It's a privilege to be able to have a picture of your partner on your desk.
Yes.
Right. And so it's those little things. So as you're talking, it's like these things are starting to come to me of it is absolutely a two-way street. Right. And sometimes it's not that we don't want to walk down that path. We may not be able to because of those fears. So how can not just the organization, but others around us help us walk that path? So we're not alone, and we don't feel as if we have to hide part of who we are. Yeah.
That is so beautiful. And you talked about accent, and just reminds me of a funny story. One of my ex-colleagues, who's also a very good friend, he says the other day, he's like, well, how come you picked up a Midwestern accent? And this was only like a couple of years back. Okay, so I've been in this country for 16 years at the time. And I was like, I didn't even know I had a Midwestern accent until you told me. I just had to change my accent in order to be understood better. And now, believe me when I say this, Sasha, I'm working on losing this accent and getting back my Indian accent. And now it's so hard because just I'm so used to speaking in an accent in which I'm felt understood, where I feel safe, where I feel like I belong. Yeah. And now I realize that I didn't have to do that. But again, when I say inclusion is a two-way street, if only I would have spoken up a little bit, saying that, oh, yeah, all right, it's okay if I repeat, I don't have to change myself or how I approach discussions, then I wouldn't have felt another thing that I had to change just so I felt like I'm not excluded and I'm included in these conversations,
And it's just so fascinating. We can just have a whole conversation about accents, but I think there's this, this mindset, right? If you have a certain accent, then that means X, right? So if it's there was research that was done recently. Like people assume that folks with British accents are smarter than those with US accents, right?
Yes, I think I've read about that.
And it's just really, because guess what? They're idiots all over the world, regardless of how they sound. They're idiots everywhere. And I used to work with a vice president, and she had a very strong Kentucky accent.
Mm,
And she talked about how she had to, again, fight so hard because people assumed because she had this strong Kentucky accent that she wasn't smart.
mm,
And so having to work her way, not just past people getting past the accent, but also being in a very male dominated space
mm.
as a woman.
Ah,
So it's like this double fight, this energy you're having to put forth.
that is
Um,
another thing that we can have another entire episode on.
all of the conversation. But it's so interesting because now that I'm thinking about, when we think this inclusion is a two-way street, it's people also stepping in
Mm-hmm.
to say, like, well, what makes you think that someone with this accent may not be as smart as you, right? Like
Yeah.
questioning those things, because that then starts to push back
Yeah.
in ways that starts to make people feel, um, okay, like I'm being seen
Mm,
for who I am and what I can contribute
mm,
versus what I sound like,
yeah.
right? And that's just one aspect of this.
Yes.
You
I
know, I've seen this, in all kinds of areas. But yeah, it absolutely is something that we as individuals need to do to step up versus
yes.
putting the onus on the organization. The
Ye-
organization has a role, absolutely, in that, but we as individuals need to uphold that.
Yes, and I think it also comes down to spreading awareness, right?
Hmm.
So only I know what my world looks like. Everyone else can make an assumption if they don't know what my world looks like. But
Right.
whose responsibility is it to share that, ooh, this is why I have this accent. Ooh, when I come into a new country, well, this was what I was struggling with. Or, yeah, even people from other parts of the world are just as smart. But my point is that it all starts with awareness. So if you spread the word on what your challenges have been or what are your challenges like, then it not only helps spread awareness, but some of these assumptions that you were talking about a minute back, those assumptions also start to disappear, what I've noticed.
Yeah.
Because people assume when they don't have enough data at hand, right?
Yeah.
And as a person who's living my life, whose responsibility is it to provide that data? It is my responsibility to provide those data points so that people know how to process, I guess, this data.
Well,
And
I want to
once,
push back a little bit
okay.
because I think that, yes, to a point, it's,
Mhm,
your responsibility to share.
mhm,
But I said this in a session last week. I did a facilitation on microaggressions, and I was like, Google is
mhm.
free. People, if you
Yes.
have questions, books, there's research that's out there to at least expand your process so that you're not putting the onus on that person to constantly tell their story.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. And that's why I say it's a two-way street. Of course, Google for the things, find out, read books for the
Yeah.
things that you want to know about. But my point is, what happens in situations where you just don't know what you
Yeah.
don't know? In those situations where you just have absolutely no idea that this was even a thing, you
Yeah.
know that oh, okay, well, I need to be careful about okay, how she feels, or how she's,
Mhm.
what is her upbringing like, what is her culture like, or how she responds. Let me give you an example. In one of my previous organizations, I was working with a team of incredibly amazing, intelligent leadership or executives, right? And I was serving them the leadership group as a scrum master and an agile coach. And we had so many discussions, and we are to a point where we are just chilling, having fun, and making fun of each other. And we are just so tightly knit at that point. And I'm talking about these people from also different part of the world, so not just in US.
Mhm.
So we were making a comment, and someone just made a comment about something that I said, and everyone had a great laugh about it. And I had this uncomfortable smile when I know that I'm offended, but I don't want to say anything. And because this person was such a good friend, for the first time in my professional life, I scheduled a one-on-one with them to talk about this. And that person was just so shocked and apologetic and grateful that,
Mm,
oh my God, I said this because this and this. And then I said, well, that word means this and this, where I come from. And he's
mm,
like, I had no idea.
mm-hmm.
Now, think about this. If I wouldn't have said anything, then that person, who is a wonderful human being, by the way, he might have said the same thing again in a
Yeah.
different situation. If I wouldn't have said anything, which I didn't for like the majority of my life. But that was the first time I realized that, oh my God, because we have such a good relation, maybe I can take this risk and try and talking to him. And he was just so incredibly grateful. I've not seen anyone as courageous as you are, and thank you so much. And keep doing what you're doing or whatever. And that gave me a lot of strength. And I just made a friend for life. So
I
I
love that example. I love that example because, when I do the microaggressions workshop, that's exactly what we say, right? If somebody microaggresses against you or says something or does something,
yeah,
right? Like find a time to follow up with them and let them
yeah,
know
yeah,
and have that conversation and try to preserve that relationship because
yeah,
so many folks are like, oh, they said something and did something, I'm gonna cut them off.
yeah,
And then now that's going to impact the work that you all do down the line,
yeah,
right? You said this person. It didn't come from a place
mhm,
of malice or ill
mhm,
intent
yeah,
or anything like that. And so
yeah,
all of the conversation,
yeah.
like, just the humanity, right? Like the humanness of who we are. And we make
Yes,
mistakes and we misspeak and,
yes,
we all do it. And it's
yeah.
just giving people space and grace.
Yeah, and looking from their lens, now they are an incredible ally. They
Yeah.
made me safe so that I could go and approach them.
Yeah.
And I've also heard about this as well. Well, I'm an ally. Okay, what do you do about that?
Mm,
I don't know. Yeah, but I try to be nice and like, it is great that you're an ally. It's wonderful that you're stepping up and you want to do these things. But that's again a thought that needs some action,
yes.
and
I
now that
always,
person, because they gave me that space and that safety for me to approach them, kudos to my friend that I was able to make use of that, and now that is what I call allyship, right?
yeah. And that's what inclusion looks like, right? When you
Two-way
feel
street.
connected, you feel seen. I have a pet peeve, and anyone that has listened to this show knows I have a pet peeve about, people calling themselves ally. Because I'm like, it is a verb, it is not a noun. You have to show me, I have to see that you're an ally because you just telling me that means nothing to me,
Mhm.
right? If you are causing harm and damage to everyone around you, like you are not an ally. So
Mhm.
it's like it is not a badge of honor that you bestow upon yourself.
All
No,
right.
right?
I love that.
It is not. So Dimple, I want to do a little bit of a pivot
Hmm.
because I know that this work is difficult. I know that this work, especially when you're passionate about it and so connected to it like you are, it takes a lot out of you, right? It depletes you. So what are the things that you do to fill yourself back up, to fill your cup as you're doing this?
Yes, and you're using my favorite. I use that in personal and professional life. Fill your cup.
Yes.
Uh,
Fill your cup. Fill your cup. Yeah.
I have an incredible support system in my family and friends.
Mm,
I have an incredible support and allyship, the verb, not just the
mhm,
noun. And I have so many ideas, and some of them are taking shape. Like one of my very good friend and I, we have started developing these video podcasts. We call that our greatest strength. And you talked about immigration when we first started talking, and
mhm,
both of us, we release one video every month as a discussion around immigration struggles.
mm,
So we call it our greatest strength because a lot of time people don't know that our greatest strength lies in diversity, on how
mhm,
we can complement each other. So, like in one episode, he interviewed my experiences, and another experience, he's American, born and raised here. So I interview him on how he sees immigrants and how he supports. Like in the future episodes, we've started inviting guests from different parts of the country. We've got guests from Ukraine and Syria, and we're just so excited to share their journey. It's a part of that spreading awareness I talk about.
yeah,
I also have another little purpose going on another end, where my two other friends and I, we have co-founded a purpose for giving back. We are a bunch of coaches. We are very passionate about serving this society, and we call it Give It Forward Coaching. And we just coach for free. And we just started this, so it's just picking up speed. So I guess one of the biggest places where I fill my cup is knowing that I'm putting myself out there and trying to make a difference, trying to spread awareness. I think that's where I gain most of my strength from.
I was gonna say it sounds like your like superpower is service.
Thank you for saying that.
Absolutely. So Dimple, if folks wanted to get in contact with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I have this OCD that I have to respond to messages. So I always try to keep up. So even if I read it, I do respond it like in less than 24 hours. I just have this immense OCD of people need to hear back. Ghosting should not be a thing if you want to treat people as humans.
Yeah.
So that's the quickest and the easiest way to reach me.
Wonderful. Well, Dimple, thank you so much for joining us today. I think that, the stories you shared and how you connected this very technical piece to this head and heart work that we do together, and how it all just comes out to make innovation and connectiveness and all of those things just a beautiful story. So thank you so much for sharing and being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Sasha. The pleasure was all mine. I had so much fun chatting with you. And we identified so many topics that we can talk about.
I'm all over the place.
Right?
I'm all over the place.
It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. And thank you all for tuning in to this week's episode. I hope that you were able to walk away with a few nuggets or some good information that you can take back into the workplace or even to your homes. You can find us here every Tuesday at 5:15 p.m. on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to like, share, subscribe, do all the things. Be sure to let us know what you're thinking about these episodes too. So until next time, have a good one.